let's transition to a big-time matchup in Buffalo this weekend. It is the Minnesota Vikings, who are 7-1, traveling to Buffalo to take on the 6-2 Buffalo Bills. It's a 1 o'clock kickoff in Buffalo. The over-under for this game is 44. Now, some key injuries. Josh Allen's status for this game is unknown. He hasn't practiced this week. He's dealing with the elbow injury. So it's going to be interesting to see if Sean McDermott and the Bills organization, if they decide to hold out Josh Allen. We know the Bills, they got Super Bowl aspirations. You got Josh Allen as your quarterback. At receiver, you got Stephon Diggs. You got Gabe Davis. At tight end, you got Dawson Knox. Okay, defensively, you got Von Miller. You got Poyer. They got back Tre'Davious White as well. So we know the Buffalo Bills, they have Super Bowl aspirations. So it's going to be interesting to see if they hold out Josh Allen and try to have him rehab to help that injury improve as the season goes along. I mean, you look at the Bills, they got a tough matchup against the Vikings this week. But after this matchup against the Vikings, they got the Browns, and then they're at Detroit. So they can beat the Browns and the Lions without Josh Allen. I don't know if they can beat the Vikings without Josh Allen, but I believe they can keep pace with the Vikings, because I'm not really impressed with the Minnesota Vikings so far this year. I know they're 7-1. Everyone's going to call me a hater because the Packers are having a terrible season, but I'm not impressed with the Minnesota Vikings in their first 8 games of the season. They have struggled in some games where they should have blew out these teams I'm about to name. Let's go back to the start of the season for the Vikings. They beat the Packers decisively in week 1, 23-7. They lost to the Philadelphia Eagles on that Monday night game in Philly. They lost 24-7, a complete beatdown by the Philadelphia Eagles on the Minnesota Vikings. Kirk Cousins had like 3 interceptions that game. Big play Slay had like 2 interceptions. So week 3, the Vikings, they're home against the Lions. They beat the Lions 28-24. Week 4, this is the matchup against the Saints. They beat the Saints 28-25. Week 5, they beat the Bears 29-22. And then they beat the Dolphins without Tua Tagovailoa. They beat the Dolphins 24-16 at their bye in week 7. Week 8, the Cardinals, they fought the Vikings all the way to the finish line, but the Vikings outlasted the Cardinals 34-26. And then in week 9, last week, the Vikings, they barely beat the Commanders. They beat the Commanders 20-17. So the Vikings, they haven't had a signature win yet. This is going to be their first game this season where they have an opportunity to have a signature win. Well, they had a chance in week 2 against the Eagles, and they underperformed in that game. But you look at Kirk Cousins, he got 13 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 1,999 passing yards for the season. But we know that in order for the Vikings to be playoff contenders, they got to lean on Dalvin Cook. And Dalvin Cook for the season, 131 carries, 608 rushing yards. He's averaging over 4 yards per carry, 5 touchdowns on the season. That's going to be key for the Minnesota Vikings, because that's how you help Kirk Cousins in primetime games. We know in the playoffs, every game is a primetime game. So I think it's going to be key for the Vikings to establish the running game with Dalvin Cook, not only in this game, but for the rest of the season heading into the postseason. You don't want Kirk Cousins to have to drop back and pass 40 times in a game. You want to split that up and have Cousins throw 25 or 28 times in a game and have Dalvin Cook have over 20 carries. So that I think that's the the key for this Vikings offense. Now we know the Vikings offensively, they got weapons in Justin Jefferson, a top 5 receiver in the NFL. You got Adam Thielen, who I believe is the best number 2 receiver in the NFL. You got newly added Hawkinson, the tight end that they traded for at the trading deadline. So they got weapons for Kirk Cousins to distribute the football to. And that's also, too, why I believe that this season, there are no excuses for Kirk Cousins. You like that? I want to hear some you like that in the playoffs, because Kirk Cousins, year after year after year, has had excuses for why he's not been able to rise up to the occasion and elevate the Minnesota Vikings into the playoffs and on a deep playoff run. The Packers are not a playoff team. So Aaron Rodgers and the Packers, they won't be a factor for the Minnesota Vikings. In the NFC, the Philadelphia Eagles, they're undefeated, but the Eagles, they are a team, they're not perfect. They're the best team right now in the NFL record-wise, but they're not perfect. So I believe if you look at the landscape of the NFC, this is a perfect opportunity for Kirk Cousins to lead the Vikings into the playoffs and on a deep playoff run. Perfect opportunity. You look at their passing attack, the Vikings have the 10th best passing attack in the NFL. They average 238 passing yards per game. But they only rush for 102 rushing yards per game. That's ranked 24th. Again, that has to improve. That has to improve if you want to be a Super Bowl contender. Now you look at the Bills offense versus the Vikings defense. We know the Bills have a high-powered offense. They are 3rd in passing yards per game. They average 292 passing yards per game. We know that they have weapons for Josh Allen, but they got Case Keenum as their backup quarterback. Case Keenum, dating back to his days in Minnesota, he has a relationship with Stephon Diggs, but I don't think that's going to matter in this game. You're going to need Josh Allen to beat the Minnesota Vikings. If Josh Allen doesn't play in this game, the Minnesota Vikings will win Sunday in Buffalo. If Josh Allen plays and he's healthy, the Buffalo Bills will beat the Minnesota Vikings in Buffalo. Kevin O'Connell versus Sean McDermott, 2 good head coaches this season. Kevin O'Connell is still unproven, but he's been pretty good in the first 8 games of the season as the Minnesota Vikings head coach. I think Kirk Cousins, he trusts Kevin O'Connell, and he didn't trust Mike Zimmer. Mike Zimmer was a former coach in Minnesota. He didn't have that relationship with Mike Zimmer compared to what he has with Kevin O'Connell. He didn't have a great relationship with Mike Zimmer, but he has a nice relationship with O'Connell. So I'm going to assume that Josh Allen doesn't play in this game. I think that it's going to be smart for the Bills to sit Josh Allen out and let that elbow heal, and Josh Allen can be close to 100% as we get into December and January football. I'm going to roll with the Vikings to beat the Bills in Buffalo. I'm going Vikings 24, Bills 17. Now, as a Packers fan, I'm hoping that the Bills beat the Vikings, but the Packers are so far in the NFC North standings, I don't see a way where they catch up with the Minnesota Vikings. I could be wrong, but I just don't see it happening at this moment.